Do idealized futures have little value? Welcome to 2024, people. That's right, folks. It is January 2nd, 2024. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all of you who celebrate at this time of year. So I've been pretty active on X lately, formerly Twitter. And we've had a lot of interesting conversations about the future, which is, of course, what we're all about here. We're all about thinking about the future and about the future in general. And you know me, I'm an optimistic futurist. In fact, that was my tagline for a while. The optimistic futurist. In fact, I might even go back to that. Because there's so many pessimistic futurists out there, it's unbelievable. I think we have to be optimistic about the future. And there's so many reasons why we should be optimistic about the future. But a lot of people think that idealized versions of the future actually have little value. And if you ask me, I would argue the complete opposite. I would argue that idealized versions of the future have immense value compared to, say, dystopian visions of the future. And I'll tell you why. One of the things that's interesting about the future, or things that will happen in the future, is that most of what's going to happen in the future, in fact, things that are happening today, this is the way the human race operates. The human race operates by envisioning new things, new solutions to problems, or anything for that matter. And to envision these new solutions to problems, or anything for that matter, we look to the past. We look to history. We look to things that have happened before in order to inform the decisions that we're going to make in the future. We look at the past. We look at the history. We look at things that have happened before. Let's just talk about patents. In the patent space, you look at and you refer to patents that have already occurred in order for you to come up with something that's happened that's new, that's different, that works in the white spaces in between the patents that are already there. You come up with ideas by combining ideas from the past and creating new ones. Now, what does that have to do with optimism? Well, I'll tell you what it has to do with optimism. If you create ideas and put those ideas out into the world, the ideas can be positive ideas which help humanity, or they can be negative ideas that destroy humanity, help reduce humanity. Someone, at some point in the future, will look back on those ideas and go, maybe I can build that. Maybe if you can't build it today, I'll build it in the future. But what are we putting out there for future generations of humans to be able to look at and learn from? Are we putting out positive visions of the future? Are we putting out positive products of the future? Are we putting out ideas that are idealized versions of the future, good things that they can look at and go, I want to develop that? I mean, look at something like Star Trek. And this is what I mentioned this before as an example. It's an optimistic vision of the future. And an optimistic vision of the future, in fact, if you ask me, it is one of probably the most important science fiction that was ever developed, because it drove thousands, maybe even millions, generations of individuals into technology and building that kind of optimistic future. That optimistic future that was presented drove people into wanting to build that optimistic future. And who knows how many millions of people were driven into building this optimistic future based on the visions that they saw in that show, that idealized future that was created by Gene Roddenberry. That idealized future, even though, and the biggest pushback is that those things cannot be built. You can't do anything like that. And it's entirely possible in the 60s, when all of this was imagined, that's what they thought to themselves. None of this is possible. It is as impossible as Superman flying through the air. It's as impossible as anti-gravity. It's as impossible, and it's completely impossible in the time frame that it was envisioned. But just because it was impossible in the time frame that it was envisioned, and that there were no resources available to be able to build these things, that doesn't mean that at some point in the future it can be done. So if you ask me, these idealized visions of the future that we are building and we are getting out there are incredibly important to inform future generations of human beings that, you know what? Here are some things that we can aspire to, that we can build, that we can create. And then as the resources become available, it doesn't matter that the resources are not available at the time that the future was envisioned. It matters that the resources became available later on when they could actually be applied to create this idealized future. So the idea can exist. The optimistic idea can exist, and it can be out there. It can be out there in the culture of the planet, in the culture of humanity, and not be buildable. But at some point, and this is why I always say everything will happen, the only question is when. At some point, the resources will become available to create this thing. And that's why it's important that what we're creating is idealized, is optimistic, is positive. Because whether you create something that's positive or you create something that's negative, at some point, some future generation will look back and go, I can build that. Do we want people to build, to have an abundance of positive things? Or do we want to have an abundance of negative things that they can go back and build? That's the question. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.